What is up, guys? I have been talking about getting stiffer springs for the Yaris since the beginning of last season, and guess what? They're finally here. So one of the very first mods that I did to this Yaris, and the first mod that I did to a car ever, was put this on coilovers. I got some Teen Street Advanced Z's because they were the cheapest coilovers I could find that would fit this car. And I screwed up the install a little bit, learned a lot about how it all works, and at some point in my track experience, I realized that the spring rates on that were all wrong. They were 3K up front and 2K in the rear, which, if you know your spring rates, that is very, very soft, especially for something on 200 treadwear tires. The other thing is that this car is so front heavy compared to like a Yaris race car because it doesn't have a roll cage. So when you brake, the back wants to lift because the front springs compress so much. So I've got spring rates that are stiffer all around for this, but I've also got springs that are even stiffer up front to help balance that out a little bit. Hopefully that works, but it might make things worse. Here's where I'm at. So the rear springs are going from a 2K spring to a 5K spring, a pretty significant jump, but the fronts are going from a 3K spring to a 9K spring. And I'm already regretting this decision a little bit. I feel like, in retrospect, it might be a little bit too much of a mismatch. But the thing that I like about this setup, if it does end up being too much, I can change out the springs in the rear pretty easily. So we'll try a track day like this. If it ends up being too unbalanced, I can go to 6K or even 7K springs in the rear to start balancing it out. And we're gonna be dialing in this car. Part of what I love about working on this platform is that it's so cheap that I can make mistakes and I can learn about the dynamics of what happens if you do something wrong and not just go with the, hey, this is tried and true, don't worry about it, just do exactly what everyone else has always done, because I feel like you might get a faster car quicker that way, but you don't learn. And I'm not racing this car to go fast, I'm racing this car to learn. At least that's what I keep telling myself whenever I buy the wrong parts. So let's get these coilovers on and see how it does.
When removing suspension, it's important to think about where you're jacking up the car. You want to have the suspension compressed when you remove the shocks so that the springs don't pop out at you. But then you want to have the suspension loose to remove everything properly.
All right, so this is the old rear spring, and you can see it is relatively soft. It's still a car spring. Here's the new spring, and I can't move it. So that's a pretty big jump from, what is this, a 2K spring all the way up to a 5K spring, more than double. But the difference with this setup is really gonna be those front springs, which are up at like 9K. The idea is that when the weight shifts forward, the stiffer springs are gonna resist the weight going forward and more weight will stay towards the rear, keeping those wheels down and eliminating our lift-off oversteer. In theory.
The new shocks slip right into the OEM placement, and then it's all about threading the needle.
So the front is a little different because this is the top of the strut tower for the Yaris. It's not really like bolts that go through like a normal coilover would be. It's this little kind of cup washer and a bolt on top. So the top of your strut goes through there and then it screws down. So you need something to sandwich the sheet metal on the top and the bottom. And it's this big chunky rubber bump stop, and there's not really a way to get rid of that. So that's the top of my tower. I'm doing all the stiffening, and there's a rubber bump stop there, which is not great.
Front Mcpherson struts are a lot easier to remove as they only have a few bolts and the spring is going to come out with them, so you don't even have to worry about spring compression. You will need a spring compressor for removing the hardware from the top of the old coilover and adding it to the new one. It's really important to do this while wearing different clothes so it looks like you filmed it on a different day. All in all, these new coilovers went in pretty easily, but in the install of the front, there was one thing that was just bugging me too much.
Hey Joey, why is the hood off of your car? Well, because I thought I was gonna make today a little bit harder on myself. No, the reason is because the strut towers in this car are so far back, they're actually under the cowl normally, and there's this little bit of metal that's on top of that. I'm gonna see if I can make a little hole in the top and maybe up through the cowl so that I can extend my adjustment to right outside the car. That way I don't have to go through this ordeal every single time I wanna make a damping adjustment. This is what happens when the scope starts to creep a little on your project. You think, oh, I'm just gonna install one thing, it's really easy. And then you run into little problems that you know you could fix while you're in there. And you know, either you're gonna leave them and they're gonna bug you, or you're gonna fix them. And you know, half-hour job, 2-hour job can become a 2-day, 3-day job. Okay, my camera ran out of battery the other day, but let me show you what I did. I've now got this hole here in the top of the cowl that is right above where the strut tower is. So the plan is to get the adjustment extenders. They're on their way, and they can sit right at the top of that hole. That way I can do the adjustments from outside. That's not gonna arrive in time for the next track day, so for now, all I gotta do is take this thing to go get an alignment. So I'm outside of my alignment guy's new location. Robert at Chairworks does an amazing job. He's also now sharing a building with Studio RSR, who sponsors the TRD series. So keeping it all in the family. So right now, Robert and the guys at Chairworks are corner balancing my car. I have to be in it so that it weighs exactly what it's going to on track. And then they weigh each corner and kind of balance out the car from there. It's still gonna be very front heavy, but we'll see how much it actually weighs. Okay, so the alignment is done in time for our track day in 2 days. We now have 3 degrees of negative camber in the front to make sure that those wheels tuck underneath, and 1.4 in the rear. We could go more in the rear, but that would make the oversteer issue worse in the liftoff oversteer situations. So we need to get the car balanced first before we do more in the rear. The car is so close to being under 2,000 pounds and living up to that 1 ton of fun name. It is 2,029 pounds, but I still have a normal battery up front, and I have an 11-pound Braille battery sitting waiting to get installed. So yeah, we'll see where else we can lose some weight and get this to be a 2,000-pound car. Until next time, though, I'll see you guys at buttonwilling.